Ethan Carter had always found solace in the gentle embrace of a sprawling suburban property, a lovingly restored haven passed down through generations. Once a decorated military veteran, and now a dedicated city official with a passion for horticulture, Ethan spent most of his early mornings tending to his prize garden. Amid the neat rows of heirloom vegetables and a secret gem of a strawberry patch, he nurtured a deep bond with the land. Every strawberry, plump and ruby red, was a symbol of his hard work and a reminder of his grandmother's wisdom. A garden is a home's heart. His modest yet charming house was an oasis of personal triumph, a patchwork of memories, laughter, and long summer evenings spent beneath the old oak in the backyard. The garden, enclosed by a low white picket fence, was his sanctuary. However, not all neighbors appreciated the organic charm of Ethan's property. In the gleaming corridors of the Homeowners Association HOA, Kerren, self-appointed guardian of suburban decorum, ruled with an iron fist and an air of entitlement. Kerren prided herself on her strict enforcement of every HOA rule, no matter how trivial. As president of the HOA and the unofficial queen of compliance, she had little patience for eccentricities. So when she noticed that Ethan's immaculate strawberry patch was overstepping community boundaries, her ire was kindled. One bright spring morning, as Ethan knelt amid dew-speckled leaves, gently plucking strawberries for his homemade jam, Kerren appeared as if summoned by a storm cloud. With sharply creased brows and a clipboard clutched in one perfectly manicured hand, she glided up the garden path. "Ethan, isn't it?" she began, voice sweetly venomous. "I'm here to discuss your blatant disregard for our community standards." Ethan straightened up, wiping his hands on his jeans, puzzled. "Standards? Kerren, my garden's been here for years. I always thought we respected each other's space." But Kerren's eyes narrowed. "Not when you think it's acceptable to hoard strawberries that belong, at least in spirit, to the entire neighborhood. Your indulgence in unauthorized gardening is a violation of our HOA guidelines." Ethan's heart sank. He'd never encountered such pettiness in all his years, yet there it was. The first confrontation in a series that would transform his quiet life into a battlefield of entitlement versus individual pride. Kerren's voice dropped to a near hiss as she outlined supposed infractions: improper plant spacing, unsightly overgrowth, and even a vague claim that his vibrant garden disrupted the community's aesthetic equilibrium. As she lectured, Ethan's thoughts turned to memories of sunny afternoons with his grandmother, who had taught him that nature, and by extension, one's own home, could never be boxed in by rigid rules. Despite his respectful tone, Ethan's frustration began to seep through. "I follow every guideline this HOA has on record," he said calmly. "My garden isn't just for me. It's a celebration of our community's roots. I won't be bullied into compliance by someone who's more interested in controlling beauty than appreciating it." Kerren's lips curled into a thin smile. "Rules are rules, Mr. Carter. And I assure you, if you don't make adjustments, the board will be forced to intervene." As the tension mounted, a small crowd of curious onlookers from the street gathered. The whispered commentary of neighbors filled the air, but none dared to side openly with Ethan or Kerren. For Ethan, this confrontation was not merely about strawberries. It was about reclaiming his right to express individuality in the face of arbitrary control. And for Kerren, it was about preserving a sanitized image of suburban perfection at any cost. That day, as Ethan returned to his garden, his mind churned with thoughts of rebellion. He knew he would have to stand up not only for his garden, but for the spirit of community that had long been eroded by overreach and entitlement. Even as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the dewy lawn, Ethan resolved that this injustice would not go unanswered. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a daring idea began to form, one that would soon set the stage for a showdown that the entire neighborhood would remember. The very next morning, Ethan awoke to a surprise taped conspicuously on his weathered front door. An official-looking envelope demanding a $750 fine. The printed letter, dense with legal jargon, cited a laundry list of alleged violations. According to the document, Ethan's illicit horticultural practices and unauthorized strawberry cultivation had disrupted the community's pristine order. Before Ethan could process the shock, he heard the click of high heels on the sidewalk. There stood Kerren, arms folded and a smug smile playing on her lips. "Good morning, Ethan," she greeted, as if delivering the news was a favor. "Remember, the rules apply equally to everyone in this community." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Rules? This fine doesn't make sense. I've adhered to every guideline since day one." Kerren tilted her head. "Perhaps you've been too lax in your interpretation. The board has spoken, and compliance is non-negotiable." The next few days were a blur of escalating events. Inspectors began showing up unannounced, clipboards in hand, scrutinizing every inch of Ethan's property. In one instance, a stern-faced official questioned the height of his garden fence and the spacing between his prized strawberry plants. Each encounter left Ethan more determined and more frustrated. Despite his record of law-abiding conduct as a city official, he was now caught in a web of arbitrary rules and baseless fines. During a tense conversation with a local zoning officer, Ethan calmly cited municipal statutes that granted homeowners the right to cultivate personal gardens without undue interference. "There's no clause in any law that prohibits the growing of strawberries," he argued, his tone measured but firm. The officer, while sympathetic, advised him to proceed carefully, as the board's influence in the neighborhood was formidable. At an emergency HOA meeting convened that evening in the community center, Kerren wasted no time in asserting her authority. With a stack of printed notices at her side, she announced, "Effective immediately, any further deviations from community aesthetics will result in additional fines and, if necessary, legal action." Her words, though delivered in a tone that suggested a benevolent warning, carried the weight of finality. Murmurs rippled through the room as neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. Ethan sat silently, his eyes burning with a mix of indignation and resolve. After the meeting, as Ethan walked back home, the fine burning a hole in his pocket and his spirit in turmoil, he couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning. Kerren's entitlement had morphed into a weapon against him, a tool to enforce conformity at the expense of individual freedom. And as the first dark clouds of injustice gathered over his once peaceful property, Ethan vowed to stand his ground, armed with knowledge and a quiet, burning determination to reclaim what was rightfully his. Determined to expose the rot within the association, Ethan installs a series of hidden cameras around his property. His once tranquil evenings become punctuated by the flickering evidence of Kerren's surreptitious meetings with board members and her shady phone calls. One such recording captured a board member, voice trembling, admitting in a hushed tone, "Kerren's been using HOA funds to cover her personal expenses. If we speak out, we're risking everything." The weight of betrayal and corruption hit Ethan hard. Not only was his sanctuary under siege, but so too were the trust and community spirit of his neighbors. Meanwhile, Kerren's tactics grow ever more brazen. One day, while Ethan was tending to his strawberry patch at dawn, he noticed a group of inspectors prowling his property, not to assess compliance, but to intimidate. Their presence was a thinly veiled threat, meant to unsettle him and reinforce Kerren's narrative of absolute authority. In a heated confrontation, Kerren confronted Ethan outside his home. "You leave us no choice," she hissed. "If you won't conform, we will take every legal measure necessary, even if that means filing for your eviction." Ethan's eyes blazed as he replied, "I have every right to cultivate my garden and my life as I see fit. Your so-called violations are nothing more than a witch hunt." The onlookers, once silent, now murmured in agreement with his words. A ripple of doubt about Kerren's motives began to spread throughout the neighborhood. At home that night, Ethan methodically organized his evidence. Photographs, video clips, and printed communications were meticulously arranged in a binder labeled HOA Corruption Files. This dossier would serve as the cornerstone of his counterattack, a testament to his unwillingness to be bullied by arbitrary power. In the glow of his desk lamp, Ethan planned not only to defend his garden, but to expose the rot at the heart of the HOA. The injustice of having his strawberries treated as a communal resource was now intertwined with a broader fight for fairness and accountability. As the days turned into weeks, the pressure mounted. Neighbors who had once watched the conflict with dismay now began sharing their own stories of minor transgressions and unfair fines. A murmur of dissent swept through the community, and Ethan's dossier became a symbol of resistance. Even as Kerren's false threats grew more alarming, the seeds of rebellion were already taking root. "Look at what they're doing to us," Ethan declares, his voice resonant with conviction. This isn't about community aesthetics, it's about control and greed. As he unfurls a file of documents and security footage, murmurs turn to audible gasps. The board members exchange nervous glances. Even some of Kerren's staunch supporters begin to waver. With every piece of evidence laid bare, the room transformed from a chamber of fear into a forum of defiant truth. Kerren, visibly rattled yet determined to maintain her facade of authority, retorts with a forced smile. "Your accusations are baseless, Mr. Carter. The board has acted within its rights to maintain property values." But the evidence was irrefutable. A neighbor, a quiet woman who had long endured Kerren's petty intrusions, stood up and corroborated Ethan's claims. "I've seen it with my own eyes," she said. "When did our community become a playground for bullies?" By the end of the meeting, the once unwavering support for Kerren had eroded. Ethan's counterstrike had shifted the narrative. Public opinion was no longer on the side of arbitrary rules and intimidation. It was on the side of fairness and individual rights. Even as Kerren fumed and insisted on her right to enforce the rules, the damage was done. The community had awoken to the abuse of power, and the scales were tipping in Ethan's favor. Yet the battle was far from over. Kerren, desperate to regain control, began issuing threats that went beyond fines and warnings. Rumors spread that she would have Ethan's utilities shut off or his property towed if he persisted. But with each overstep, Ethan's resolve only hardened. He reached out to local media, scheduled interviews, and even quietly consulted with legal experts, ensuring that every step of his rebellion was rooted in truth and legality. Ethan's transformation from a gentle gardener into a determined avenger was complete. The community, now united in defiance of Kerren's tyranny, rallied around him. The once silent murmurs of discontent had become a collective roar for justice, and a promise that no one's home would be overrun by entitlement ever again. "I assure you, officers, that there's no disturbance here, only a man tending to his rightful property," he explains, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. The officers, recognizing the absurdity of the call, exchange exasperated looks before departing with a warning to Kerren about misuse of emergency services. But Kerren's desperation does not end there. Late that night, as Ethan reviews the latest security footage, he notices a figure skulking around his garage, one of the hired private investigators Kerren had secretly employed to dig up dirt on him. In the grainy video, the intruder is clearly seen trying to bypass Ethan's security system. Ethan's jaw tightens. "This is it," he murmurs. "Enough is enough." Determined to expose Kerren's underhanded methods once and for all, Ethan arranges for a live presentation at the next HOA meeting. But even as he compiles damning evidence of trespassing, fraud, and forgery, he prepares a final, unexpected card, a subtle twist that no one saw coming. Earlier that week, as Kerren's petty theft of his strawberries continued unabated, Ethan had devised a cunning plan. Quietly and methodically, he had switched out the very strawberries that Kerren repeatedly pilfered with super spicy chili berries. Berries so potent that even a nibble would send the taster into a fiery, uncontrollable reaction. The plan was ingenious in its simplicity. Every time Kerren stooped to rescue what she believed were Ethan's ripe, succulent strawberries, she would instead be met with an explosive burst of heat, a final, poetic punishment for her greed. And now, with her final act of desperation underway, Ethan unveiled both the damning evidence against her and a small basket containing the new harvest. During the meeting, as Kerren attempted to launch another round of baseless accusations, Ethan calmly played the security footage for the assembled homeowners. The grainy images of the private investigator and the subsequent confrontation had everyone in stunned silence. Then, with a wry smile, he presented the basket. "These," he said, "are a reminder that what you take by force will always come back to you. just with a little extra kick. The room erupted in laughter and applause. For the first time, Kerren's authority was not only challenged by legal evidence, but by the very taste of her own bitter, spicy medicine. As murmurs of approval echoed throughout the hall, Kerren's face flushed a deep shade of crimson. Her final, desperate move had been met with a full, resounding force of community unity and poetic justice. At a hastily convened community meeting, the tone had shifted from fear to jubilation. Neighbors shared stories of past grievances and offered hearty congratulations as Ethan, standing tall on the makeshift stage, acknowledged their collective triumph. "Today," he declared, "we reclaim not just our rights, but the spirit of this community. We will no longer allow one person's entitlement to dictate our lives." His words, both a celebration and a rallying cry, resonated with every homeowner present. Outside, whispers of Kerren's disgrace had already begun to spread. The news that her house was slated for sale, and that she would be forced to resign from any position of authority within the neighborhood, added a final, humiliating twist to her downfall. As the investigation into the HOA's corrupt practices widened, several board members faced legal scrutiny. Their complicity in Kerren's schemes laid bare for all to see. For Ethan, victory was bittersweet. Though the scars of a prolonged battle would remain, the liberation of his community and the vindication of his own steadfast principles brought him a sense of fulfillment he had longed for since that first unwarranted confrontation. With Kerren's reign ended, the neighborhood could finally breathe again, and Ethan's garden, now a symbol of resistance and renewal, bloomed more vibrantly than ever. At a press conference held in the freshly liberated community center, Ethan detailed the timeline of abuses, presenting the meticulously compiled evidence that had toppled the tyrannical regime. "Today," he stated, "justice is served not just for me, but for every homeowner who was forced to live in fear of arbitrary power." His calm, authoritative tone underscored the gravity of the situation while inspiring hope in those who had once felt voiceless. Local newspapers ran headlines celebrating the downfall of the once feared HOA, and the state bar announced that it would be investigating Kerren's longtime lawyer, whose questionable ethics had further compounded the injustice. The legal repercussions extended well beyond fines and dismissals. They heralded a new era of transparency and fairness in the neighborhood. Ethan's final power move, filing the class action lawsuit, became a rallying point for reform, ensuring that no future board could operate with unchecked authority. Kerren's reputation took a nosedive as she struggled to find employment in any capacity that required trust or leadership. Her car was repossessed after creditors learned of her mounting debts, and rumors swirled about a bitter divorce initiated by a spouse tired of her relentless ambition and arrogance. One particularly humiliating day, as Kerren attempted to salvage what little dignity she had left by seeking a minor administrative job at another HOA, she was spotted arguing over trivial fines, an ironic twist that left onlookers shaking their heads in disbelief. Ethan, having long witnessed the slow collapse of her empire, could only offer a small, wry smile. "I hope you like following the rules," he murmured under his breath as he passed by. For many in the community, Kerren's downfall was the ultimate lesson in accountability. Her personal and professional life crumbled as swiftly as her misguided authority had risen, and every incident, no matter how small, served as a reminder that entitlement, when unchecked, eventually bores its own grave. Neighbors now meet informally on sidewalks and in front yards, laughing over shared memories of the past months. The garden that had once been a battleground for injustice now symbolizes hope and unity. Even as someone, perhaps a playful reminder of days gone by, slides an old, handwritten HOA notice over to Ethan's porch, a note so absurd in its contents it sparks a round of laughter. He simply smirks and replies, "They really tried." In that quiet moment, the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows that mingle with the fading echoes of Kerren's tyranny. The spicy twist in his garden, once a secret act of defiance, has become legendary, a symbol that sometimes the sweetest victories come with a bit of unexpected heat. With the neighborhood free to celebrate individuality and creativity once more, Ethan's garden flourishes, each strawberry or chili berry, a testament to the resilience of a community that refused to be bullied. And so, as the credits of this turbulent chapter roll into memory, the final mic drop is delivered not with grand gestures or sweeping speeches, but with the simple, enduring truth. No matter how high the walls of entitlement may rise, the spirit of freedom and the occasional spicy surprise will always find a way to bloom.